'Tis I, your old pal King Chuck. I hope you're having a great day. It's been a beautiful week. So glad it hasn't rained much, although we are expecting thunderstorms today in Grand Rapids. A lot of the flooding concerns from northern Michigan and elsewhere are starting to subside. And, you know, I knew it was going to happen. It wasn't going to be a totally catastrophic flood for most people, but still, what a scare. And, you know, and of course, unfortunately, sometime today, I'm going to have to try to get some lawn mowed. Well, some bad news and good news. First, the bad news. Yesterday, Warner Brothers Discovery investors and stockholders agreed to sell the company to Paramount and Skydance and the Ellison family. So now the ball is going to get rolling. It was approved. Of course, I don't think anything was approved yet, but I'm sure Trump and his FCC will approve the merger, obviously. Of course, during the first term, Disney purchased the assets of 20th Century Fox, and that created a huge merger. And of course, the Murdoch family, they still own Fox Television and some of the, of course, Fox News channels, the TV stations. But yeah, of course, 20th Century Fox is now known as 20th Century Studios because of the merger between them and Disney. So I do, unfortunately, expect this merger to go forward and onward. But then again, I think there will be some judges in the way who will say, you know, the merger, of course, they own CBS. And of course, CBS and CNN will merge, and this will mean less choice for the viewer. But some judges will say this merger cannot go on as a result. And, you know, you have to realize that recently there was a proposed merger between Nexstar and Tegna, which would have meant that they would own three TV stations, three full-power TV stations in West Michigan. Wood TV 8 and the two ABC affiliates, WZZM 13 and WOTV Channel 41. And my suspicion was that they would shut down 13's news department and move Juliet Dragus from 13 to 8. Because Susan Shaw recently retired. So my personal take on all this is that, you know, thankfully 13 is still around, even though it's never been my first choice for television news in West Michigan. I've always been a Wood TV 8 guy. And, you know, there's 4 TV stations in West Michigan that do news. Wood TV 8, WZZM Channel 3, which is Sinclair, CBS. Of course, I mentioned WZZM 13 and Fox 17 WXMI, which is owned by Scripps. And there are rumors that Scripps and Sinclair may merge, and that Scripps is not doing very well in terms of profitability. So this could be something to look out for. I know that Nexstar is going to try to appeal. You know, this was a $6 billion merger that was in the works. And honestly, in all honesty, folks, all honesty, I want less I don't want less competition for TV news. And, you know, it's so sad. You know, I look at northern Michigan, where I'm from, and you got 4 TV stations, and, you know, they create, you know, the two owners of channels 7 and 9 create shell companies to control channels 29 and 32, and that means less selection for Northern Michigan, even though 29 and 32 never really had great news departments to begin with. I mean, 29's news department for many, many years was only consisted of, just the cut-ins for the Good Morning America. You know what I mean? But anyway, but I do have some good news to report to you this morning. So the good news is that it looks like Tyrone Bynum is flying the white flag, so to speak. So the story is, Tyrone Bynum, of course, is the guy who took over radio station WPRR 1680, and he my dog is she is thirsty. Yeah, my poor dog is thirsty. I'm at the park right now. So the story is, I've been reporting to you about the Saga of WPRR 1680 AM. It used to be public reality radio, and then it became 102.5 The Ride, and I told you the story about what happened. Tyrone Bynum. So the story is, Tyrone Bynum ran another radio station in town many years ago, WMFN 640 AM. That station was a news talk station, and it was owned by a Arab family from Detroit, the Birachs, B-I-R-A-C-H. And the Birachs, they leased their stations to other people. Well, Tyrone, I think what happened was he heard a rumor that he was going to get fired at 640 by the then current lessees, two guys named Pierre Cook and John Shepard, two guys who have since died. And so the story was, Cook Shepard was about ready to fire him. So what does Tyrone do? He drives all the way to Detroit with as much money he could and bought out Cook Shepard's lease so he could control 640, and he converted 640 into an R&B station called Smooth Vibes 640. And the station had no ratings, none, very few ratings. And long story short, Tyrone ended up, after 2 years, he gave the lease back to the Birachs, who then gave it to Canos Broadcasting. They were a Spanish broadcaster. 640 flipped to Spanish, but then the Birachs moved the station to Chicago, where it's now a black news talk station that is operated by iHeartMedia, formerly Clear Channel. So that's kind of how the saga with 640 went. So Tyrone kind of laid low for a couple of years. He focused on being a college professor and a lawyer. And then so this news station, 1680 WPRR, was launched by Bob Goodrich. It was originally an urban station called 680 Jams. Then it went to Radio Disney for a while. And then Radio Disney stopped broadcasting to terrestrial radio. So what happened was, for a while, the call letters were WDSS for Disney. So what happened was 1680 then flipped to this new format that Bob conjured up called public reality radio, which was supposed to be like NPR, but further to the left. And they had Pacifica Radio as their network source, and Pacifica, they're a leftist radio network. Long story short, so anyway, they hired this guy, Darren Gibson, to be the programming director. Eventually, he had a podcast that grew into the radio program called Southpaws. It became a very popular radio show and the highest rated show on the whole station. But then Tyrone jumped in and he had his own show on the station called Drive for the Dream. And long story short, Tyrone found a way. The story was Tyrone was a vote blue no matter who guy. And in 2016, Tyrone, so the story was 10 years ago, 2016. Darren announced on the show that he knew that the Democrats were going to screw Bernie Sanders over. He was a Bernie supporter. And Bernie, of course, his MO was, higher taxes for the wealthy, and, he wanted to create a universal health care insurance, which would have benefited all Americans instead of the few. Basically, he wanted to be another FDR. Long story. So anyway, let's get back to the rest of the story. So Darren Gibson found a way. Hang on, I got another dog in my way.
Is that a big scary guy?
Nah, she just hates other dogs.
Yeah.
So it's like, but smaller dogs she's okay with.
Big dogs she does not like?
Not really.
Okay, Molly. Yes, is that how you solve the problem?
Yeah. She does like humans, though. My apologies. There was a guy who saw my dog, and anyway, the joys of going to a dog park. But anyway, so the story was, Tyrone decided to screw Darren over by having a closed-door meeting with other Democrats, the Kent County Democratic Party. And one of the people involved was Tracy Kornack. Tracy, by the way, is... it looks like she might be going to jail for embezzling money from one of her clients. Kornack is a total cunt for what she did. See you next Tuesday. Well, you won't be seeing her at all after she goes to prison, which is what she needs to do. So the story was Tyrone found a way to get rid of Darren Gibson. And I finally remembered on the last Southpaws episode, Darren was in tears because he had a huge argument with Tyrone. I don't know the full what Tyrone said to him. But anyway, long story short, Darren was fired from WPRR. Bob Goodrich said that he was fired because his ratings were bad, and Darren had the receipts. It wasn't the ratings. Darren was fired because of that meeting and the fact that Darren was telling the truth about the Democratic Party. And the truth was that they did not care about, they wanted to stay as centralized as possible. They didn't care. And because of that shit, we ended up with another candidate like Al Gore back in 2000. And of course, Joe Lieberman, of course, his big thing was he wanted Howard Stern and Jerry Springer off the air. So that's what happened. This is why the Democratic Party is not well liked, folks. So, long story short, Darren Gibson was fired, even though the ratings for Southpaws and his other shows were good. He was simply fired for telling the truth. So the good news was he continued to do Southpaws as a podcast. Meanwhile, Tyrone was pretty much given the keys to 1680. All the local hosts were either fired or they all quit. And then what happened was Bob Goodrich ended up bankrupt. He ended up, so Bob made his money from his father. Bob's father founded a movie theater chain, Goodrich Quality Theaters, back in 1930. And Bob was embroiled in one scandal after another. And what had happened was the big one scandal was he fired all of the underage employees, under 18 employees, because he wanted to serve alcohol as theaters. And then he had to file for bankruptcy because he claimed that he was spending money hand over fist on renovating his theaters, and he blamed Hollywood for not producing enough hits. But then COVID hit, and he totally lost his theaters. He ended up having to sell his theaters to a private equity firm. So Bob, at last check, now lives in a townhouse in Grand Rapids. As a matter of fact, he actually lives down the street from another failed broadcaster, Roy Henderson, who ran WLDR radio in Traverse City and a bunch of other stations into the ground. Roy was a giant piece of shit for what he did. He screwed me over. He screwed Dan Stevens over. Of course, Dan went to jail because Roy was taking, because he wasn't paying his child support, and it turned out that Henderson was taking his child support out of his checks and giving it to himself. So he went to jail because of him. The reality is, there's a lot of fucked up broadcasters up here, everywhere. And so the story with Tyrone was that he was supposed to purchase 1680 from Goodrich through a company called Ghettothropic. It was him and his wife Portia. And Portia is Portia, by the way, not Porsche, the sports car. So they turned 1680 and 102.5 into an adult R&B station called 102.5 The Ride. 1680 was almost either never on the air, or they were airing a separate format with no station ID. So 1680, so basically Tyrone was running the stations illegally, and already he was given a huge slap on the wrist, by the FCC for not keeping up with his emergency alert system logs, which is vital. Sometimes you'll watch a TV show and you start hearing these strange beep sounds, and they're testing the equipment, and it's very important in case you end up with a big thunder shower or thunderstorm in the area, or a tornado, high winds, whatever. It is FCC law, and Tyrone did not keep up with that. He did not keep up with station logs. He was a very irresponsible broadcaster and a very unprofessional one. He was very unprofessional from the get-go. I remembered when he was at 1680. When he was at 640, one of his responsibilities was he had a Sunday morning gospel show. And for shits and giggles, one Sunday I was listening to 640. They were an affiliate of the Michigan Talk Radio Network. They had like a weekend travel show or whatever it was. And then this is what happened at like 6:45 a.m. In mid-sentence, they cut off the broadcast and went straight to Tyrone's gospel show. Tyrone was never on time with that. Not only that, when he took over 6:40 a.m., he also took over the contract to carry Detroit Tiger baseball. And on Sundays, he would never carry Tiger baseball because he was honoring Jesus on that day. Well, what happened was people complained. They complained to CBS. CBS carried the games, was the originating broadcaster off of 97.1 Detroit. And what happened was it led to a huge argument between CBS and Tyrone. And they said, we're going to look for another affiliate. So next season it went to WBBL and WLAV. And, the Tigers have jumped around a lot in Grand Rapids in the last several years. Now they're on 98.7, which is good programming in my opinion. 98.7 might be one of the better stations in town. And so what happened is, so anyway, according to FCC documents, as of right now, both 1680 and 102.5 are silent. And there were papers filed to the FCC, and it stated that Goodrich was still the owner of the station. I guess the FCC never approved of the buyout, or they pulled out. I don't know. But according to FCC documents, financing was the reason for them being shut off. But it might be the reason why 1680 itself was off the air. And under federal FCC rules, if you have a translator station, you must simulcast with another outlet, whether it's another FM station, an AM station, or a digital HD subcarrier of an FM station. You cannot do things yourself. And that's what Tyrone was doing. 1680 was off the air roughly 95% of the time. He was operating those two stations, and I did complain to the FCC a few times. I will personally admit. And I did it because I was angry about what Tyrone did to Grand Rapids media. And Tyrone says, well, he even told me one time in an email that you don't care about black people, don't you? Or you look at all black people as the same. Because I was from northern Michigan, which is 90%, 95% white. It's not that. The truth is, Tyrone is folks, I went after a ton of broadcasters in my life because of their mediocrity. I went after Matt Hanlon, who is a white dude. And Hanlon, of course, screwed over Howard Stern and WKLQ. He was a white guy. I went after most of the broadcasters in northern Michigan. Of course, Roy Henderson, he slapped me with a cease and desist. He told me, don't talk about my stations anymore. And it's like, dude, you're doing this to cover your ass. And the fact of the matter is, your covering your ass hurt you at the end. And look at what happened. Look at what happened to WLDR. They lost their transmitter site. They lost two of his stations lost their licenses. Come. And the rest of the story was now even he lives in a townhouse. He had to sell off his properties to cover his debts and tax problems. The point is, folks, come. Yeah, my executive producer is acting up. Hang on. Yeah, she's saying hi, by the way. There we go. I had to put her up into my car. the point is, folks, is radio is a business. You alienate people and you will have no ratings and no advertisers. And when you don't subscribe to a rating service like Nielsen, guess what happens in the end? You don't have any receipts to prove to your potential advertisers that you don't have the receipts to prove to them that you have listeners. And that's what advertisers want. You know, you got to spend money to make money. It's true. And it sucks that, you know, I look at the radio industry as a whole right now, and you got radio stations with fake DJs, out-of-town DJs. Some radio stations are even doing AI. And it makes, you know, years ago, people were laughing at me because I actually decided not to get into radio, but rather into a business that's AI proof. And, you know, I make money. I'm actually taking the day off because we're caught up at work. And, you know, I'm actually going to be doing some chores today. And one of the chores I got to do is I actually have to go to Harbor Freight Tools. And I think the nearest Harbor Freight is at Rogers Plaza. So that means that in Rogers Plaza is where WPRR studios are. And I would imagine that they probably packed up and left. Who knows? But I will keep reporting on this. This is, you know, so under federal, so this is not the end of WPRR. They are still a licensed station. It's just that they actually, you know, this was FCC protocol. If your station falls silent, you're going to have to report to the FCC that you're off the air, and you have to give a legitimate reason, and that legitimate reason for Tyrone is obviously he ain't got money. I mean, when I listened to their advertisers, folks, when they were still on the air. Okay, sorry, Beastie Boys, I love that song, but yeah, I can't. Yeah, I don't want to strike against me, unfortunately. But that's what it is, folks. I listened to WPRR when Tyrone was running the show. I listened to the advertisers. They were all in the ghetto. And I already told you about one of the advertisers, a furniture store called Kaufman's, which was in the same plaza where there's on 28th and Eastern. You got a Price Cutter grocery store that used to be a Save-A-Lot. You have Dollar Tree. You have a wig shop. And there's a store called Chowhound. I hate going there because people drive like assholes in the parking lot, number one. And number two, every time I went to Chowhound, almost every other time, there'd be a beggar. And they beg for me up and down for money, and they cry that they, you know, they're not a crackhead. And I'm like, come on, man. It's people like you that make other black people look bad. Okay? I am not here to wipe your ass. I am here to grab something. You understand that? To grab stuff from my dog. My executive producer, who is now resting comfortably, you know, on the floor of the passenger seat. Yeah. You know, the point in, you know, I know it's not nice to judge people, but, you know, it's like better safe than sorry. Tyrone, anyway, I told Darren Gibson the news that, about what happened to WPRR, and he actually did tell me that he wished he had the money to buy the station. And they're wondering if there was a way he could buy it outright. And all I can say is good luck to him. I hope that station will come back on the air someday and be back to entertain the masses here in West Michigan. I mean, what Tyrone Bynum did to WPRR was a total disgrace. And like I said, there's too many narcissistic people out there. And they've allowed their radio stations to die a slow, sad, painful death. Some quicker than others. Whether it's corporate media or even the small guy. I mean, what these people all did was wrong. And I hope Tyrone has learned his lesson. That you don't want to fuck around with the truth. And the truth was, he's an asshole. So, anyway, all I have to say is I pray and hope that 1680 and 102.5 will end up in the right hands, because that's what that station definitely needs. And if they bring back and a good progressive talk station could do well here in Grand Rapids. I think Darren did tell me this, that Southpaws had a wonderful listener base when it was on the air. People need to know the truth. And they don't need big corporations to spin it. Okay? Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Good riddance to Tyrone. Now, like I said, it's still licensed. I mean, the station has about a year to stay off, to remain off the air. But if somebody wants to buy it, they can. If Tyrone wants to put a temporary format on his stations, he can do that. But yeah, he just wasn't making the money. Gee, I wonder why. Okay, folks, I gotta get running. Good day and good luck. Have a good day, everyone.